The hardest part about losing a child isn't the silence afterward, the old bailiff whispered as he gathered the last stack of case files. It's realizing the room was full of people who could have changed everything. Naomi Carter heard only fragments of the sentence before the courtroom doors swung open behind her, because every sound inside the chamber had dissolved into one impossible reality. The court grants sole legal and physical custody to Victor Carter. Judge Harold Benson's voice remained steady, practiced, almost gentle, but every word landed like another brick sealing a door that Naomi had spent 7 years trying to keep open. "No," she whispered, though no one seemed to hear. Across the polished courtroom floor, 7-year-old Ethan twisted toward her as the court officer gently guided him toward his father. "Mom," his small voice cracked with confusion instead of fear, as if he still believed someone would explain that this had all been a terrible misunderstanding. Naomi instinctively stepped forward before stopping herself. Every muscle in her body begged her to run to him, to promise everything would be okay. But her attorney had already warned her that one emotional outburst could damage any future appeal. She clenched both trembling hands around the worn leather strap of her purse until her knuckles turned pale. "I love you, buddy," she called softly. "Remember what we talked about. Be brave." Ethan nodded through tears he clearly didn't understand. Clutching the faded blue backpack she had packed before sunrise with his favorite dinosaur, a peanut butter sandwich cut into stars, and the tiny notebook where she wrote him one encouraging sentence every morning. Victor barely looked at her as he accepted the custody paperwork. His expensive navy suit fit perfectly, his expression calm, confident, rehearsed. Months of high-priced attorneys had delivered exactly what he wanted. He placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder before leading him toward the exit without saying a single word to Naomi. One by one, spectators gathered their belongings and drifted into the hallway, already moving on with their own lives. The fluorescent lights reflected against polished marble floors while conversations resumed about lunch meetings, parking validations, and weekend plans. For everyone else, Courtroom 4B had become just another case on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Naomi remained standing beside the defense table long after the judge disappeared through the private door. Her eyes rested on the empty witness stand where she had spent hours trying to explain 12-hour nursing shifts, overdue rent, canceled childcare, and why exhaustion should never be mistaken for neglect. None of it had sounded strong enough against expensive experts and carefully prepared testimony. She slowly bent down to collect the folder that had slipped from her hands. Medical schedules, school attendance records, receipts, birthday photographs. Every page represented another attempt to prove something she believed should never have required proof: that she loved her son. As she reached for the final document, another hand quietly picked it up first. A tall man wearing a charcoal suit offered it back without introducing himself. His face was composed, almost unreadable, framed by close-cropped salt and pepper hair that contrasted with calm brown eyes studying the courtroom instead of her. "You dropped this," he said simply. Naomi accepted the folder with a tired smile that barely existed. "Thank you." She assumed he was another attorney waiting for the next hearing. She walked past him without noticing the discreet security badge clipped beneath his jacket or the respectful nods exchanged between him and several courthouse officials. Malcolm Hayes watched her disappear into the hallway before turning back toward the empty judge's bench. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he noticed something almost everyone else had overlooked. The court clerk quietly removed a document from the evidence binder and replaced it with another copy before locking the file cabinet. The motion lasted less than 3 seconds. So ordinary that no one questioned it. Malcolm did. His executive assistant, Rebecca Collins, approached carefully from the rear entrance. "Sir, your meeting starts in 20 minutes. Malcolm kept his eyes on the now empty bench. "Reschedule it." Everything. Rebecca hesitated. "Was the hearing what you expected?" Malcolm answered without looking away. "No." He glanced once toward the closed courtroom doors through which Naomi had disappeared. "It was cleaner than I expected." Rebecca frowned slightly. "Cleaner?" Malcolm slipped a small leather notebook from his pocket and wrote only one sentence before closing it again. "Get me every filing connected to Carter versus Carter," he said quietly. "Every transcript, every procedural motion, every amendment, every clerk log. I want the complete chain of custody before sunset." Rebecca recognized that tone immediately. It was the same voice Malcolm used whenever something appeared perfectly legal, yet somehow fundamentally wrong. "You believe there was judicial misconduct?" she asked. Malcolm remained silent long enough for the question itself to become unsettling. Finally, he answered in little more than a whisper. "I believe someone wanted this case to look unquestionable." He looked once more at the empty courtroom, where a little boy's voice still seemed to echo through polished wood and marble. "Now let's find out why." Naomi Carter had always believed that exhaustion was temporary, that one more overnight shift, one more skipped meal, one more promise to herself could keep her little world together until life became easier. As she stepped out of the courthouse into the chilly October afternoon, she pulled her light jacket tighter around her shoulders, not because of the cold, but because it still carried the faint scent of Ethan's strawberry shampoo from where he had fallen asleep against her the night before. The parking lot looked exactly as it had that morning, yet everything about her life had changed in less than 45 minutes. Her aging silver sedan waited near the far corner beneath a maple tree shedding brilliant orange leaves. She unlocked the driver's door, sat behind the wheel, and rested both hands on the steering wheel without starting the engine. Ethan's booster seat remained fastened in the back, his favorite blue blanket folded neatly across it. A half-finished box of crayons lay on the floor beside a children's library book they had planned to return after school. She reached back and picked up the small notebook she always tucked into his backpack. The final page she had written before sunrise read, "No matter where today takes us, I will always find my way back to you." She pressed the notebook against her chest and quietly closed her eyes before taking one slow breath and starting the car. 20 minutes later, she parked outside St. Gabriel Medical Center, where she had worked as a registered nurse for nearly 6 years. The automatic doors opened with their familiar soft hiss, carrying the scent of disinfectant, fresh coffee, and polished floors. Life inside the hospital moved forward with comforting indifference. Monitors beeped. Stretchers rolled past. A little girl laughed somewhere down the hallway after receiving a balloon from a volunteer. Naomi tied her hair into a neat ponytail, slipped on her identification badge, and walked toward the nurse's station exactly 3 minutes before her shift began. "You made it," charge nurse Denise Walker said gently, offering a sympathetic smile that revealed she had already heard the news. Hospitals had a way of spreading difficult stories long before official words were spoken. Naomi forced a small smile. Patients still need their medications. Denise rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Go easy on yourself today." Naomi nodded but immediately accepted her assignment sheet. Room after room, she focused entirely on everyone except herself. She comforted an elderly veteran worried about an upcoming procedure, helped a frightened teenager call his mother, and patiently explained medications to a young couple welcoming their first baby. Every smile she offered felt genuine because caring for strangers had never been the difficult part. During her short lunch break, she sat alone in the staff lounge with a peanut butter sandwich she had prepared for herself while making Ethan's breakfast that morning. She automatically reached for her phone to send him the funny dinosaur picture she texted every afternoon before remembering that she no longer knew if Victor would even allow him to read her messages. Her screen remained blank except for a notification from her attorney. "Appeal options available. Call when ready." Naomi stared at the words before quietly locking the phone again. Across downtown, Malcolm Hayes entered a private conference room lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the courthouse district. Rebecca Collins had already arranged dozens of neatly organized folders across the polished oak table. Every filing connected to Carter versus Carter had arrived exactly as requested. Malcolm removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and opened the first binder. Financial affidavits, custody evaluations, school attendance reports, employment records. Everything appeared complete, meticulously indexed, and perfectly compliant with procedural rules. Yet something continued to trouble him. He compared timelines without speaking, occasionally making brief notes in the margin of his leather notebook. After nearly an hour, Rebecca slid another folder toward him. "These are the clerk activity logs you requested." Malcolm examined several pages before stopping abruptly. This amendment was uploaded at 8:43 on Monday morning. Rebecca checked the timestamp. "That is correct." Malcolm turned another page. "The hearing notice says the filing deadline expired Friday at 5 o'clock. Rebecca looked up. Then how was it accepted? Malcolm did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened another document containing Naomi's work schedule from St. Gabriel Medical Center. Every overnight shift, every overtime request, every paycheck painted the same picture. She was not avoiding responsibility. She was working herself beyond exhaustion simply to survive. He continued reading until he found Ethan's elementary school attendance reports. Perfect attendance except for 3 documented doctor appointments and 1 influenza diagnosis. Teacher comments consistently described Ethan as kind, respectful, and academically ahead of grade level. Malcolm leaned back slowly. None of it matched the portrait presented in court. He closed the file and looked through the conference room window toward the courthouse standing quietly across the street. Somewhere inside that building, every signature had followed the rules. Every form had been filed correctly. Every procedure appeared legitimate. Yet the complete story somehow felt less truthful than the frightened voice of a little boy calling for his mother. Malcolm picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "I need an independent audit of every procedural step in this custody case," he said calmly when the call connected. "No assumptions. No shortcuts. If someone bent the rules without technically breaking them, I want to know exactly where it happened." As he ended the call, his eyes returned to one simple sentence written in Ethan's school file by his second-grade teacher months before the hearing. When Ethan talks about home, he always says, "My mom never gives up." Malcolm quietly closed the folder. For the first time that day, he wondered whether the person who refused to give up might soon need someone else willing to do the same. Malcolm Hayes had learned long ago that the most dangerous lies were rarely spoken aloud. They lived quietly inside paperwork, hidden behind signatures, deadlines, and procedures that looked perfectly ordinary until someone asked why they existed in the first place. Long after the lights in the administrative offices had dimmed, he remained seated alone in the conference room with another stack of files spread before him. Rebecca Collins returned carrying 2 cups of black coffee, setting one beside him without interrupting his concentration. "You have been reading the same 3 pages for almost 20 minutes, she observed gently. Malcolm looked up only briefly. "Because they keep telling 2 different stories." Rebecca pulled out a chair across from him. "What are you seeing?" Malcolm slid a custody evaluation across the table. The evaluator concludes that Ethan needed a more stable environment because his mother worked too many overnight shifts. Rebecca nodded. "That seems consistent with the ruling." Malcolm placed another document beside it. "This is a recommendation letter from St. Gabriel Medical Center written 6 months earlier. It praises Naomi for volunteering to cover emergency shifts during a severe staffing shortage while maintaining outstanding patient care." He paused before opening Ethan's school attendance records once again. His teacher also wrote that she never missed a parent conference. Rebecca frowned. So she was present in his life despite working those hours. Malcolm slowly nodded. "The facts exist. The conclusion does not." Silence settled between them for a moment. Outside the windows, downtown traffic drifted beneath glowing streetlights, while rain began tapping softly against the glass. Malcolm stared into the darkness, but his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. "Do you remember the first time I told you about my mother?" he asked quietly. Rebecca smiled faintly. "You said she worked 2 jobs and still found time to read 1 chapter every night before you went to sleep." Malcolm's expression softened with memories that time had never erased. She cleaned office buildings before sunrise and worked as a cafeteria cashier during the day. Most people looked at her and saw a tired woman who could barely keep up with the bills. His eyes settled on Ethan's school photograph clipped inside the file. "I saw the strongest person I have ever known." Rebecca remained silent, understanding he was not finished. "When I was 8 years old, a social worker visited our apartment after someone reported that my mother left me alone too often." Malcolm's voice stayed calm, almost detached, yet every word carried years of quiet weight. "No one asked why she worked 16-hour days. No one asked why every neighbor in the building knew my name or why I always had dinner waiting in the refrigerator with handwritten notes telling me exactly how long to heat it." He smiled sadly. "People often confuse sacrifice with neglect because sacrifice is harder to recognize." Rebecca leaned back slowly. "Is that why this case is different for you?" Malcolm looked down at Naomi's employment records once more. "No." He closed the folder carefully. This case is different because I promised myself decades ago that I would never allow assumptions to become evidence if I had the authority to stop it. Before Rebecca could respond, Malcolm's phone vibrated softly against the table. The caller identification displayed a familiar name. Daniel Morris, Director of Judicial Compliance. Malcolm answered immediately. Tell me you found something. Daniel's voice carried the careful restraint of someone who preferred facts over speculation. I found something unusual, but not illegal. At least not yet. Malcolm straightened in his chair. Go on. The amended financial affidavit submitted by Victor Carter was accepted after the filing deadline under an emergency administrative exception. Malcolm glanced toward Rebecca. Who approved the exception? A brief pause followed. That is the problem. The approval code belongs to a deputy clerk who retired 3 months before the document was filed. Malcolm said nothing for several seconds. Rain continued striking the windows in gentle waves while Rebecca watched his expression shift almost imperceptibly. Daniel continued. It could be a clerical error. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. Or someone reused inactive credentials. Exactly. Daniel lowered his voice. There is another issue. Security logs show someone accessed the electronic case file at 11:47 the night before the hearing. The courthouse was officially closed. Malcolm slowly rose from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking the courthouse across the street. Hundreds of office lights reflected against the wet pavement below. Somewhere inside that building, a decision had altered a child's future. Preserve every digital record, Malcolm said quietly. Do not notify anyone connected to the case. I want a complete forensic review before sunrise. After ending the call, he remained standing with both hands in his pockets. Rebecca approached carefully. You were right. Malcolm shook his head almost immediately. No. His eyes never left the courthouse. I only know that the story we were given is incomplete. At that same moment, several miles away, Naomi unlocked the door to her silent apartment. Ethan's sneakers still waited neatly beside the entrance exactly where he had left them that morning. His favorite cereal bowl remained drying beside the sink. She walked into his bedroom, sat gently on the edge of the neatly made bed, and picked up the stuffed dinosaur he slept with every night. Without realizing it, she whispered the same promise she had repeated since he was born. I am coming back for you. Across the city, Malcolm looked once more at the courthouse standing beneath the rain and quietly made a promise of his own. This time, someone was finally going to ask the questions everyone else had been too comfortable to ignore. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from a missing document or a dramatic confession. It came from silence. At 6:30 the next morning, Malcolm Hayes walked through the secure entrance of the Judicial Compliance Division, carrying nothing more than a slim leather portfolio and a paper cup of black coffee. The building was already awake, yet one office remained strangely dark. Where is Melissa Grant? He asked as Rebecca Collins joined him near the records department. Rebecca checked her tablet. She called in sick 30 minutes ago. Malcolm slowed his pace. Has she ever missed work without notice? Rebecca shook her head. Not once in the 11 years she has worked here. Melissa Grant had been the senior records clerk responsible for maintaining electronic filing histories. According to courthouse activity logs, she was also the employee who should have noticed if inactive administrative credentials had been used. Malcolm stopped outside her empty office. Family photographs still decorated the bookshelf. A knitted coffee mug warmer sat beside her keyboard. Her planner remained open to today's date with 3 neatly written appointments that now had no one to attend them. Nothing suggested a woman planning an unexpected absence. Daniel Morris emerged from the archive room carrying a sealed evidence envelope. Our forensic team completed the first review before dawn. Malcolm accepted the envelope and removed several printed audit reports. Tell me the good news first. Daniel exhaled quietly. The digital records were not hacked. Malcolm looked up. And the bad news? Someone with authorized access entered the case management system after hours using retired credentials, viewed the Carter file, then modified the document history without changing the documents themselves. Rebecca frowned. Why change the history instead of the evidence? Daniel pointed to a highlighted section. Because if no one questions the timeline, no one ever examines the evidence again. Malcolm remained silent as he studied the sequence of timestamps. The changes were subtle. Filing orders had shifted by only a few minutes. Internal review notations appeared slightly earlier than they should have. Individually, Each adjustment seemed harmless. Together, they transformed an improperly accepted filing into one that appeared completely routine. Someone understood exactly how these audits work, Malcolm said softly. Enough to hide inside the system instead of attacking it. Daniel nodded. That level of precision usually comes from someone who has worked here for years. Before anyone spoke again, Rebecca's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen before looking toward Malcolm. Melissa's access badge was used this morning. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. She called in sick. Exactly. Her badge entered the courthouse garage at 5:48. Daniel immediately reached for another report. Security cameras? Rebecca's expression changed. Camera 12 covering the employee entrance experienced a recording interruption lasting 4 minutes. The hallway felt unusually quiet. Malcolm slowly closed the audit folder. 4 minutes is long enough to enter a building. Or leave one, Daniel added. Malcolm looked toward the large courthouse map mounted on the wall. Every hallway, archive room, and server closet suddenly carried a different meaning. Seal the electronic archives, he instructed calmly. No files leave this building without my authorization. Daniel hesitated. That will attract attention. Good, Malcolm replied. If someone is nervous enough to erase footprints, they are nervous enough to make another mistake. Across town, Naomi finished another exhausting shift before walking 2 blocks to a modest legal aid office squeezed between a laundromat and a family-owned bakery. A handwritten sign taped beside the reception desk read, "Appointments running behind. Thank you for your patience." She quietly took a seat beside 3 other parents waiting for consultations, each holding folders thick with paperwork and hope. Nearly an hour later, attorney Linda Chavez welcomed her into a small office lined with worn law books and family photographs. Linda listened carefully as Naomi explained the custody hearing from beginning to end without exaggerating a single detail. When she finished, the attorney folded her hands. "I am going to be honest with you." Naomi nodded. "Please." Appeals are difficult because appellate courts rarely reconsider facts. They review legal errors. Naomi looked down at the thick folder resting on her lap. "Then I need to find the error." Linda studied her for a long moment before offering a gentle smile. "Most people leave here asking if they still have a chance." Naomi's voice remained steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "I am asking where I should start looking." Linda opened a blank legal pad and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. "Obtain the complete case file." She slid it across the desk. If the truth exists, it exists somewhere in the paperwork. Naomi accepted the page as though it were far more valuable than legal advice. Outside, she paused beneath the autumn sunlight before placing the paper carefully inside Ethan's little notebook, the one she still carried everywhere. At that exact moment, several miles away, a courthouse employee quietly removed a small portable storage drive from a locked desk drawer, slipped it into a coat pocket, and walked calmly toward the employee exit, unaware that Malcolm Hayes had already ordered every security log from the previous 72 hours to be preserved before anyone had the chance to rewrite the story again. 3 days after the custody hearing, Naomi Carter discovered that hope could survive on almost no sleep at all. She left St. Gabriel Medical Center just after 7 o'clock in the morning with tired eyes, sore feet, and another stack of overtime hours that would barely cover next month's rent. Instead of driving home, she parked outside the county courthouse carrying a worn canvas bag filled with neatly labeled folders, legal forms, and Ethan's little blue notebook. The marble steps seemed taller than she remembered, but she climbed every one without slowing down. Inside the records office, a young clerk looked up with a practiced smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Naomi placed her driver's license on the counter beside the case number she had memorized days earlier. "I would like certified copies of every document filed in my custody case." The clerk typed quietly before pausing. "That is a fairly large request." "I know. There will be copying fees." Naomi glanced inside her wallet. She had already counted the cash twice before walking in. "Can you tell me exactly how much?" After several moments of calculation, the clerk slid a printed estimate across the counter. Naomi's heart sank. The total equaled almost an entire grocery budget for the week. She swallowed quietly before forcing a polite smile. "Could I begin with the filing history and procedural records first?" The clerk nodded. That would reduce the cost significantly. Naomi thanked her and handed over nearly every dollar she had brought. As the receipt printed, she reminded herself that every page was another step toward Ethan. Across the city, Malcolm Hayes stood inside the secure forensic laboratory as technicians carefully reconstructed courthouse server activity from backup archives. Multiple computer screens displayed endless rows of timestamps and digital access logs. Most people would have seen meaningless numbers. Malcolm saw a timeline waiting to tell the truth. Daniel Morris pointed toward one highlighted sequence. Whoever modified the filing history used retired credentials, but they also connected through a workstation assigned to Archive Room B. Malcolm folded his arms. Who had physical access? 8 employees. Narrow it. Daniel hesitated. 7 were logged into different departments at the same time. Malcolm looked directly at him. Which leaves 1. Daniel handed him a personnel file. Melissa Grant stared back from the employee identification photograph. Except she reported being sick that morning, Daniel added. Malcolm remained thoughtful. Someone used her badge while she stayed home, or someone wanted us to believe she was here. Before Daniel could respond, Rebecca entered carrying another folder. I found something else. Malcolm accepted the documents. They contained employee parking records from the courthouse garage. Melissa's badge had entered the building, but no vehicle had been recorded entering under her license plate. Malcolm looked up immediately. Someone walked in using her badge. Rebecca nodded. Or another employee carried it inside. Malcolm quietly closed the file. People rarely hide a lie without protecting someone else. Meanwhile, Naomi sat alone in a quiet corner of the courthouse library, surrounded by legal reference books she barely understood. Linda Chavez had highlighted several sections explaining appellate procedure, and Naomi carefully copied notes into a yellow legal pad, one sentence at a time. She was not pretending to become a lawyer. She simply refused to remain helpless. Hours passed unnoticed until an elderly librarian approached her table. You have been reading continuously since this morning, the woman said kindly. Naomi smiled apologetically. I have a lot to learn. The librarian glanced at the growing stack of handwritten notes. Most people give up after the first hour. Naomi looked down at Ethan's notebook resting beside her papers. A small drawing of a smiling dinosaur peeked from between the pages. My son is waiting for me whether he knows it or not. The librarian quietly disappeared before returning several minutes later, carrying 2 additional books. These explain family court appeals in plain language instead of legal language. Naomi looked up with genuine surprise. Thank you. The older woman smiled warmly. Sometimes the right book matters as much as the right lawyer. Late that afternoon, Naomi finally received the first certified copies she had requested. She slowly turned each page, comparing dates, signatures, and filing times exactly as Linda had suggested. Most of it appeared ordinary until one notation caught her attention. A financial affidavit submitted by Victor had been accepted under an emergency administrative exception. She frowned. Victor had never mentioned any emergency. She circled the notation with a blue pen before writing one simple question in the margin. Why? At nearly the same hour, Malcolm received the preliminary forensic report he had been waiting for. One sentence immediately drew his attention. An external storage device had been connected to the archive room workstation exactly 11 minutes before the filing history was modified. He stared at the timestamp without blinking. Someone had not merely viewed the case. Someone had copied it. Malcolm closed the report and looked toward the courthouse through the office window. Down below, people crossed busy intersections without realizing that somewhere among them walked a person carrying answers capable of changing one little boy's future forever. The first Real defeat arrived quietly, without raised voices or dramatic headlines. It came folded inside an official envelope that Naomi Carter found waiting in her mailbox after another 12-hour shift. She carried it upstairs without opening it, balancing a paper grocery bag against her hip while climbing the familiar stairs to her apartment. Inside, she placed a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a box of pasta into the nearly empty refrigerator before finally sitting at the small kitchen table. Ethan's chair remained exactly where he had left it. His favorite blue plastic cup still rested upside down on the drying rack beside the sink. Naomi carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The Appeal Review Board had denied her request for expedited consideration. Her petition would remain in the standard review process, which could take several months before any hearing would even be scheduled. She read the letter twice before placing it neatly beside her coffee mug. There were no tears, only silence. She reached for Ethan's notebook, opened to the page where she had written his last lunch message, and added another sentence beneath it. I am still coming for you. It is only taking longer than I promised. The next morning, Linda Chavez called with another difficult update. Victor's attorney has filed notice that he intends to relocate with Ethan to Colorado within 72 hours. Naomi stopped walking through the hospital corridor. The sounds of rolling carts and distant monitor alarms faded behind the pounding of her own heartbeat. Can he do that? She asked quietly. Linda hesitated before answering. Under the current custody order, he can request relocation unless we obtain an emergency stay. Naomi leaned against the hallway wall, closing her eyes for only a second. What are our chances? Without new evidence, they are not good. After the call ended, Naomi stood motionless until a young patient waved at her from a nearby room. She immediately smiled, straightened her shoulders, and continued her rounds. No one inside the hospital would have guessed that every passing hour brought her son closer to another state. Across the city, Malcolm Hayes received news that was equally discouraging. Daniel Morris entered his office carrying a thin folder instead of the thick report Malcolm had expected. The forensic review has been suspended. Malcolm looked up. By whom? The Oversight Committee. Daniel placed the folder on the desk. They cited jurisdictional concerns and instructed us to halt all additional examination until further notice. Malcolm remained expressionless, but Rebecca Collins immediately recognized the disappointment behind his calm demeanor. Someone wants this investigation buried, she said. Daniel nodded reluctantly. Officially, they believe the irregularities are administrative errors that do not justify a broader inquiry. Malcolm slowly closed the folder. Administrative errors do not conveniently appear only in one custody case. Daniel lowered his voice. I agree. But until the committee reverses its order, my hands are tied. After Daniel left, Rebecca looked toward Malcolm. What now? Malcolm walked to the window overlooking the city. Below, thousands of people hurried through ordinary lives without realizing how easily truth could disappear beneath procedure. We continue with everything that remains lawful, he answered. Someone is counting on us becoming discouraged. That afternoon, Naomi arrived at Ethan's elementary school, hoping to speak with his second-grade teacher before the move became official. Mrs. Henderson welcomed her with gentle eyes that immediately revealed she had already heard the news. She opened Ethan's classroom drawer and carefully removed a stack of drawings he had completed over the past month. He asked me to keep these safe, she explained softly. Naomi smiled through tired eyes as she looked through pictures of dinosaurs, rockets, and one crayon drawing showing a little house beneath a bright yellow sun. 3 figures stood holding hands in front of it. Above them, Ethan had written in uneven letters, "Home is wherever Mom is." Naomi gently traced the words with her fingertip before carefully placing the drawing inside her folder. "He misses you every day," Mrs. Henderson whispered. Naomi nodded without trusting herself to answer. As she left the classroom, she noticed a school calendar hanging beside the office door. Friday's date had been circled in red marker. Tomorrow. Victor planned to leave with Ethan tomorrow. Across town, Malcolm's phone rang just as he stepped into the courthouse parking garage. Rebecca answered first before quickly handing him the call. "Sir," Daniel said urgently. "Melissa Grant finally returned home this afternoon." Malcolm stopped walking. "Did you speak with her?" "No. Someone else arrived before we could." Malcolm's expression hardened. "Who?" "We do not know yet." The visitor stayed less than 5 minutes, then left carrying what appears to be a small document box. Malcolm immediately turned toward his car. "Keep surveillance on the house. Do not approach anyone until I get there." He ended the call and looked toward the courthouse one last time before getting behind the wheel. Somewhere between a denied appeal, a child preparing to leave the state within 72 hours, a suspended investigation, and a missing box of records, the truth had become more fragile than ever. And for the first time since this journey began, even Malcolm could not ignore the possibility that they might already be too late. By Friday morning, every clock seemed to move faster than Naomi Carter wanted it to. Victor's relocation papers would become effective by sunset unless a judge issued an emergency stay, and without new evidence. Linda Chavez had already explained that such an order was almost impossible to obtain. Even so, Naomi refused to surrender to the word impossible. She arrived at the courthouse before 8 o'clock, carrying the same worn canvas bag that had become heavier with every document she collected. She walked directly to the records office and requested one final item. I need the complete electronic filing history, including every administrative access log connected to my case. The clerk looked at her with genuine sympathy before slowly shaking his head. Those records are restricted. Naomi lowered her eyes for only a moment. Who is allowed to request them? Only the Judicial Compliance Division or a court order. Naomi thanked him anyway and stepped aside. She had expected another closed door, but somehow hearing the answer aloud strengthened a question that had been growing inside her for days. If ordinary parents could never examine the process, how would anyone ever discover when the process failed them? At nearly the same hour, Malcolm Hay stood inside Melissa Grant's modest living room while morning sunlight spilled across carefully arranged family photographs and neatly folded quilts. Melissa sat quietly on the sofa with both hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. She looked exhausted, not frightened, but like someone who had carried a burden for too long. Daniel Morris remained near the doorway while Rebecca Collins placed a sealed evidence bag on the coffee table. Inside rested the small portable storage drive recovered from the document box that an unknown visitor had attempted to remove the previous evening. Malcolm spoke gently. "Mrs. Grant, no one here believes you created this situation. We only need the truth." Melissa looked down at the storage drive before answering. "I never changed any court records." Malcolm nodded. "I believe you." Tears gathered in her eyes anyway. "Someone borrowed my access badge 3 weeks ago. My supervisor said another department needed it for emergency maintenance because mine still opened the archive server room after the software update." Daniel immediately looked toward Malcolm. "Was that request documented?" Melissa slowly shook her head. "I asked for an email confirmation afterward. They told me not to worry about it." Malcolm remained silent while Rebecca carefully connected the recovered storage drive to a secure forensic laptop. Within seconds, a directory of copied courthouse files appeared on the screen. Hundreds of case folders filled the display. Most were ordinary civil matters. Only one immediately caught Malcolm's attention. Carter versus Carter. Rebecca opened the folder. The copied documents matched the official record until she reached a hidden subdirectory labeled Archive Drafts. "This was not in the court file," she whispered. Malcolm leaned closer. Inside the hidden folder sat an earlier version of Victor Carter's financial affidavit. Rebecca opened the document. The room fell completely silent. Unlike the version submitted to the court, this draft clearly disclosed substantial investment income that had disappeared from the final filing. Malcolm quickly compared both documents side by side. Dates matched. Signatures matched. Entire paragraphs matched. Only one section had changed. Victor's reported income had been dramatically reduced, making Naomi appear financially unstable by comparison. Daniel looked stunned. "This changes the entire financial analysis used during the custody hearing." Malcolm continued scrolling until another file appeared. A scanned email chain dated 4 days before the hearing. The sender's address belonged to Victor's attorney. The recipient was not Judge Benson. It was Thomas Keller, the court administrator responsible for processing late filings and assigning administrative exceptions. Rebecca opened the final email. "Please substitute the corrected affidavit before Monday's hearing. The previous draft was uploaded in error. Thank you again for your discretion." Malcolm read the message twice before quietly asking, "Where is the attachment metadata?" Rebecca searched the forensic copy. Every attachment remained intact, including automatic timestamps generated before the official filing deadline expired. Daniel slowly exhaled. The replacement affidavit was prepared after the deadline. Malcolm nodded, which means the emergency administrative exception became essential because the proper filing period had already passed. He looked toward Melissa. "Judge Benson never saw the original affidavit," Melissa whispered. "Then he ruled using information that should never have reached him." Malcolm closed the laptop carefully. For the first time since the investigation began, the missing pieces finally connected. The judge had not secretly favored Victor. Someone inside the administrative process had quietly altered the path the evidence traveled before it ever reached the courtroom. Malcolm immediately reached for his phone. "Contact the Chief Ethics Commissioner," he instructed Rebecca. Request an emergency judicial review before the relocation order becomes final. As Rebecca hurried to make the call, Malcolm glanced once more at Ethan's school drawing that had remained tucked inside Naomi's copied case file since the first day of the investigation. Beneath the smiling stick figures and bright yellow sun, one sentence suddenly carried even greater meaning than before. Home is wherever Mom is. For the first time in days, Malcolm allowed himself to believe that before the sun set, there might still be enough time to make those words true again. The emergency judicial review convened less than 2 hours before Victor Carter's scheduled departure for Colorado. The courtroom was smaller than the one where Naomi had first lost custody, but the weight inside it felt infinitely heavier. No reporters filled the benches. No curious spectators whispered among themselves. Only the people whose decisions would determine whether one little boy boarded a plane that evening. Naomi sat beside Linda Chavez with both hands resting quietly on Ethan's blue notebook. Across the aisle, Victor appeared noticeably less confident than he had during the original hearing, though he still exchanged calm words with his attorney while occasionally glancing at the courtroom clock. At precisely 1 o'clock, Chief Ethics Commissioner Eleanor Brooks entered alongside Judge Harold Benson. Malcolm Hayes remained seated near the rear of the courtroom, saying nothing. He had no role as an advocate. His responsibility had ended the moment the evidence reached the proper authority. Now the truth would have to stand on its own. Commissioner Brooks addressed the room without unnecessary ceremony. This proceeding concerns newly discovered evidence regarding administrative handling of documents submitted before the original custody hearing. It is not a retrial. It is a review of whether the court received complete and accurate information. Judge Benson nodded solemnly. Proceed. Linda rose first. She did not appeal to sympathy or emotion. Instead, she placed 2 financial affidavits on the evidence table. Your Honor, these documents appear nearly identical. However, only one was disclosed during the original proceedings. The commissioner carefully compared both versions while the court clerk projected them onto a monitor visible throughout the room. Every page looked the same until highlighted figures appeared side by side. Victor's previously undisclosed investment income exceeded $180,000 annually. The version admitted during the original hearing reported only a fraction of that amount. Commissioner Brooks turned toward Victor's attorney. Can you explain this discrepancy? The attorney adjusted his glasses before answering. The earlier version contained clerical mistakes and was replaced before the hearing. Malcolm quietly watched as Rebecca handed another sealed folder to the commissioner. Inside were the recovered electronic records from Melissa Grant's storage drive. Commissioner Brooks reviewed the metadata before looking up. According to the authenticated server logs, the replacement document was uploaded after the filing deadline. It could only have entered the record through an emergency administrative exception. She turned another page. The digital attachment history also confirms the original affidavit was never presented to Judge Benson. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Judge Benson leaned forward, studying the reports personally. I was never informed that multiple financial versions existed. Commissioner Brooks nodded. The administrative process failed to disclose material information. Victor shifted uncomfortably in his chair while his attorney requested permission to respond. There was never any intention to mislead the court. Before anyone else spoke, Commissioner Brooks displayed the recovered email chain. Then perhaps you can explain this correspondence requesting substitution of the revised affidavit after the statutory filing deadline while asking for discretion. The attorney's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He searched for an answer that never seemed to arrive. Judge Benson slowly removed his reading glasses. Counselor, did you knowingly submit financial information after the legal deadline without disclosing the revision to opposing counsel? A long silence followed. Finally, the attorney lowered his eyes. The updated figures reflected my client's preferred accounting interpretation. Judge Benson's voice remained calm, but unmistakably firm. That was not the question. Victor looked toward his attorney before quietly speaking for the first time. I trusted the legal advice I received. His words carried uncertainty instead of confidence. Commissioner Brooks closed the evidence folder. Regardless of intent, this court relied upon incomplete financial disclosures and an improperly processed administrative exception. Judge Benson folded his hands together for several thoughtful moments before delivering the decision. The integrity of every custody determination depends upon complete and accurate evidence. Because that standard was compromised before this court reached its original conclusion, the prior custody order is hereby vacated pending a full evidentiary hearing. Naomi closed her eyes for only a second as the words settled over the room. Judge Benson continued, "Until that hearing is completed, temporary primary custody shall return to Naomi Carter. Ethan Carter will remain within this jurisdiction." The gavel struck once. No one cheered. No dramatic celebration interrupted the moment. Naomi simply covered her mouth as quiet tears finally escaped after days of determined restraint. Across the aisle, Victor lowered his head, understanding that the case would now be decided with every fact visible instead of hidden. Malcolm remained seated where he had been from the beginning. Rebecca looked toward him with a faint smile. "You could have walked away after the first hearing." Malcolm watched Naomi carefully hold Ethan's blue notebook against her heart. "No," he answered softly. "The evidence simply needed a chance to arrive before the truth did." 1 year later, the same courthouse stood beneath a bright October sky, but it no longer felt like the place where Naomi Carter had believed her world was ending. Fresh flowers lined the entrance, children laughed as they chased pigeons across the front plaza, and the maple tree beside the parking lot had once again turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Naomi climbed the familiar marble steps carrying neither legal folders nor stacks of evidence. Instead, she held the hand of 8-year-old Ethan, who proudly wore a neatly pressed blue shirt and carried the same faded dinosaur backpack that had traveled through every chapter of their journey together. The backpack looked smaller now, but he still refused to replace it. "It reminds me that some things are worth fixing instead of throwing away," he had told her only a week earlier. Those words had stayed with Naomi ever since. Inside the courthouse, a modest ceremony recognized several reforms adopted after the investigation. Administrative filing procedures had been redesigned, digital access systems strengthened, and independent verification was now required whenever emergency filing exceptions were requested. None of the changes carried Malcolm Hayes's name, although nearly everyone in the room quietly understood who had insisted they happen. Malcolm himself stood near the back beside Rebecca Collins, exactly where he had stood during the first custody hearing so many months earlier. He seemed perfectly comfortable allowing others to receive the applause. Naomi spotted him before the ceremony began. She hesitated only briefly before walking over with Ethan beside her. "Mr. Hayes?" Malcolm turned with his familiar calm expression. "Mrs. Carter." Naomi smiled. "It is Naomi now." Malcolm returned the smile. "Then Naomi it is." For a moment, none of them spoke. Some gratitude simply refused to fit inside ordinary words. Ethan looked up at Malcolm with curious brown eyes. "Mom told me you helped people find the truth." Malcolm knelt until they were eye level. "No, Ethan. Your mom never stopped looking for it. I only helped make sure someone listened when she found it." Ethan considered that answer carefully before reaching into his backpack. He pulled out the same little notebook Naomi had filled with encouraging messages since he was old enough to read. The cover had become worn, its corners bent from years of being carried everywhere. "Mom says you should have this." Naomi looked surprised. "Ethan." He smiled. "You said we should always thank people who change our lives." Malcolm accepted the notebook gently and opened to the final page. Naomi had written only one sentence that morning before leaving home. "Thank you for reminding us that justice is strongest when someone refuses to stop asking honest questions." Malcolm closed the notebook without speaking for several seconds. "I will take good care of it," he said quietly. 2 years passed. Naomi continued working as a nurse, but one evening each week she volunteered at the same legal aid office where Linda Chavez had first handed her a blank sheet of paper and told her to begin with the case file. She never offered legal advice. Instead, she sat beside frightened parents, organized documents, explained paperwork in plain language, and reminded them not to lose hope simply because the process seemed overwhelming. People often asked why she devoted so many hours after exhausting hospital shifts. She always answered the same way. "Someone once helped me understand that giving up and running out of strength are not the same thing." Ethan grew into a thoughtful young boy who loved science, dinosaurs, and helping classmates who felt left out. His teacher often noticed that whenever another child cried, Ethan quietly walked over first instead of waiting for an adult. One afternoon, he explained why. Sometimes people do not need someone to fix everything right away. They just need to know they are not alone. On another autumn morning, Malcolm entered the courthouse for an unrelated meeting and paused outside courtroom 4B. The hallway looked almost identical to the day he had first watched a little boy call for his mother. Through the open doorway, he noticed another family waiting nervously for their hearing to begin. A young child sat silently beside his mother, clutching a stuffed bear almost exactly the way Ethan had once held his dinosaur. Before Malcolm could continue walking, Ethan appeared at the end of the hallway with Naomi. They had come to deliver donated school supplies for children waiting through long family court hearings. Without being asked, Ethan walked over to the nervous little boy, knelt beside him, and offered him a brand new box of crayons from the donation bag. "These help pass the time," he said with an encouraging smile. The frightened child smiled back for the first time that morning. Malcolm watched quietly from across the hall before turning toward the courtroom doors once more. The hardest part about losing a child had never been the silence afterward. It had always been believing no one cared enough to change what came next. Today, that silence no longer lived here. It had been replaced by ordinary people choosing kindness, responsibility, and courage one small decision at a time, proving that sometimes the greatest victories were not won by the most powerful voice in the room, but by the quiet people who simply refused to stop doing what was right.